And welcome back. Just going to go straight back in here and have a quick whip through methodology. Um, again, the text wall is not open, or it's open, but it's not in my view. So just so you know, I won't be able to respond. I'm just going to quickly whip through the second part. So what was it about these books, these stories, and we wanted to identify stuff. So pretty much a more just sort of descriptive approach anyway. And then the idea is what that you've identified. Why is that useful then? How would that apply to uh, certain aspects or areas of educational methodology, which means the way you do things in a classroom, basically. So, how is this stuff useful in the classroom? Is the basic question when it comes down to it. And you need to identify stuff in the books or films that would be then useful for particular ways of working in the classroom, just to put it into a sort of Scandinavian lilt there for you. Scandinavian almost with a f. So things that we've touched on and have been in the course reading and flagged for throughout the course, building on as well. We could even add some of the stuff from part one as well, because there was assessment, planning, assessment for learning, yada yada. Contents, we've touched on motivation, reading strategies, using picture books in ELT, using film in ELT, using drama in ELT, intercultural learning, writing strategies, should be cross-curricular learning is there as well if you want to go into that area, because we brought that up from term one as well. And using literature in the classroom, which I've sort of approached through this section that I've called descriptive and narrative writing. So right up at the top, we looked at motivation, and that's something we can always talk about. What is it that produces that sort of intrinsic motivation in our students? We looked at DC and Ryan and their self-determination theory, and this has gone well off, I'm afraid. How do we encourage reluctant readers, emergent readers, struggling readers? Is one of the issues at large. And we talked about, I then introduced some of the wider issues, which is culturally right now as well. There's a lot of competition for time reading, and lots of readers are not used to sitting down and reading large books, as you can see there from Cunk on Britain, that I used to try and illustrate this point. We have, for example, and Kunk's point there as well. Really, it's the voice of Charlie Brooker. The YouTube film watching generation would probably put beauty influencers on the internet and vloggers on a par with Charles Dickens. Okay, this is terribly out of it. DC, and I popped up an interview with him in there where this was taken from. Thought it was better to, rather than quantifiably think about it, but to think about different types of motivation. And they now call it sort of autonomous motivation, where interest, enjoyment, and value are characterized by that, as opposed to controlled motivation, which is characterized by reward and punishment or obligation. And DC talks about, sorry about this layout, but we've got it in the PDFs there as well, these sort of basic psychological human universal needs of competence, being able to do stuff, relatedness, belonging to a group, and autonomy, being able to choose what you want to do, which is what I've tried to engender in the oral exam. DC then points to Ryan's integrative motivation, that you have this sort of intrinsic motivation that I think we've taken on board and integrated into our own vocabularies. I've certainly seen excellent evidence of that in your own work, as opposed to extrinsic motivation, and how sometimes things that you don't want to do become things that you actually enjoy. and that's integrative, things that are then internalized. Perhaps you hate a book, but then you read it and understand more about it and begin to like it just because of the understanding you've gained. Reading strategies with reluctant readers.
Excuse me.
Hello.
Hi, it's Annika.
Hiya.
Are you flipping your pages? We can only see page 4 and the half of your recording box.
What are you getting? Oh, it says not shared here. There.
There you go.
Is that correct? It does it sometimes. Oh, there you go. If I
Yeah.
touch the record box, sometimes it flips out as well. Thank you for pointing that out. 2 seconds. I just need to get my power cable.
Thank you.
Also apologise for the PowerPoints and the way that they come out. I don't understand how it manages to. It's a sort of some sort of age-old Apple Microsoft rival going on here, which is why I normally publish them as PDFs. So we talked about reading strategies, intensive reading. Oh, there's Abby, by the way. Look, there's my daughter. Being a sort of bottom-up approach, extensive reading top-down. So I'll bring the thumbnails a little bit so I can do this. Where were we there as well? And then we have and implemented our work looking at all these ideas of pre, while, and post strategies, which really sort of set up a sort of active learning process and matching with the pre, during, and post of task-based learning, or TBL, which is something we've also learned, and you can sort of think about relating working with books, whether it's with exposition, and how that can be used potentially for these kind of TBL style setups that encourage active learning. We looked at pre-reading activities. I'll speed up here now. And a lot of you have worked with those already in your course requirements. So it's something you can draw on and draw out as you think about some of the texts. We talked and looked at while reading activities. We talked about some sort of ideas, and we sort of enacted a few ideas at our course meetings. There's Coraline, and these are sort of Munden, actually taken from Munden and Sandhaug, etc. Some ideas for post reading activities. And we sort of moved on to really look at how you could build something more out of it in terms of sort of drama. As we looked at extensive reading, contra intensive reading, and how we could then potentially relate it to issues of motivation. We tried as a project this term as well to read extensively and then discuss in class, but not really go for close readings or intensive readings, not break it down too often, sometimes taking sessions or sections or excerpts from books. Oh gosh, it's horrible looking at this and seeing it so with such an ugly layout as well. Then we also looked at the art of using picture books as methodology. I discussed Berktwaite's multiple constructions of meaning. They are multimodal, and so they give different layers. And we looked at some of the pluses and the minuses with picture books. Often, I don't think it says it there as well, but it falls in line with ideas that support use of authentic texts and authentic language, because picture books give this sort of iconotextual, well, there's the word itself, support, or the support of picture of what's being shown, which we learnt to be the one aspect, as opposed to there is the verbal and the visual aspect, which is of equal importance. Also this idea of dual address. And so we discussed and looked at some of the books and ideas of format, font, paper, paratextual elements, we called these, which exist in all books as well. And it's important whether you're reading Jane Eyre from the 19th century or whether you're reading Everybody Poos from, I think it's 2003 or so, that we've still got these same bits of information, that a book is much more than just the sort of the printed text. So I'm going to fast forward through some of these bits as well, looking at illustrations. We talked about title pages, some of the great reading from term 1. And it's important to remember that that these sort of expectations are explored in pre, while, and post activities, and can be applied to film, to drama, and to so-called high culture too. So we explored the idea of how Barthes picked up on this sort of idea of the visual can support the verbal and anchor it, anchorage he called it, or it can somehow sort of relay it. It's sort of the notion of slippage, that there could be multiple meaning. We don't have to go for that tough term. Barthes is somebody we could certainly draw on, or we could just draw a little snippet from Barthes there if we wanted to. And we looked at narrative strategies, setting, perspective, plot. We've already dealt with on the other side as well. So we looked at pictures being mimetic, mimesis versus diegesis, that words tell us things, that there was a link to direct and indirect characterization, as in the words are diegetic and they're narrated, they're told to us, whereas the pictures are indirect characterization. And issues of how pictures and cameras and perspective can somehow play together. We looked at movement on the page, and this idea of not only perspective from who tells the story, the narrative voice, to the point of view in the story as well, which might give us this sort of duality and multimodality. We looked at this sort of tight plotting and plot orientation in picture books. We've already discussed it in sort of narrative techniques there as well. And of course, the richness of intertextuality, which is possibly part of the format, but we've kind of explored it through different genres and seen how intertextuality works right from the beginning, right from fairy tales as well. And then we explained and explored. We looked at Rosie's Walk, 1970 Pat Hutchins classic. And so that's an area in terms of we could look at that a lot of you may well favor, is looking at using picture books. Notice how they interact with ideas of character, of exposition, character setting and conflict, but they specifically play a lot on perspective and plot very, very strongly, and so they can tie in there. That's one of the elements you might be looking to explore in more depth, is who's telling this story when you have a multimodal story, and that's why you use picture books. We looked at film, and we did that back at the course meet, didn't we? We said that everything's a text. What isn't a text? A song, a picture. And we've tried to use that same technique that we have in the literature side of looking at story as an exposition and a structure, and then sort of a thematic vehicle, and said that it can be applied all across the board. That film works very strongly and intertwines with motivation, and using film and motivation are a natural area to look at together. Plus, we can also look at this idea of film being one of the greatest vehicles for intercultural learning, and also great opportunities for language learning, ELL, or language acquisition, and cross-curricular learning as well. So natural tie-ins across the board there. Just fast forward. What's that? And we talked about strategies for film, and we practice some of these. So I'm not going to spend too much time looking at this. We can use this idea of the setup to make predictions, can't we? We talked about while watching. We did explore some ideas of taking pictures, for example, and getting people involved, trying to trip that affective filter. And then we looked at pictures of Frodo Baggins dressed as a girl and just went, but post-watching as well, it was the idea of actually interacting with a film, and we've looked at plot diagrams, ways of analyzing scenes. We've looked at motif for meaning and how we can bring that out in a scene as well. That's an excellent way of working with a scene, is trying to pick out a single motif that could be an object, and deciding, whether it's Frodo Baggins' headwear here in this scene as well, and making it into a motif that means something in a scene is something I've done very successfully in class before. And we talked about that links, and we built on it with mimesis and diegesis between the differences, and it's an important area. We talked about this at the conference about LK20 as well, that film, because it's an adaptation, it allows you to explore and support deep learning by looking at format and the differences between what you can do with a film and what you can't do with a film. And I think this is an area that, hopefully you've got to work with, and that naturally a lot of you find engaging and motivating. So we discussed that. We looked at the Hunger Games, and we've tried to explore that in lots of other books as well. The camera is present tense, and the ideas of the flashback and the flash forward having to be clearly signaled. It's quite interesting, as opposed to the narration in the past tense. This is film. How much? We've got quite a way to go. So yes, we looked at it. We looked at the multi-sensory modes, post-watching strategies. There was a similarity, and look how it all has an active learning setup with a pre-task, a task, and a post-task, just like TBL. And we explored and looked at making tableaus and interviews with characters, and that's something that you can then draw on and link to if you're going to talk about, for example, there, Jane Eyre, if that were your example as a book. There's little Jane in the Red Room, passed out. Then you might like to look at how you could focus on certain elements. There could be a motif, for example, the Red Room, and then how you could take that and explore it, and then use it in the classroom as well, and perhaps even use the film in the classroom too. So we looked at all sorts of ways, and the invitation here is, when we look at narration, for example, in using film or drama, then the narration part of drama or film is linked to how we analyze literature, and that's how it comes about. And so there's lots of examples here of mimesis and diegesis, and that's what we explored, how taking out elements or substituting elements, adapting elements, allowed us to understand aspects of literature. It was basically stealth literature, sneaking it in through various ways of using it. We looked at drama as well, and I know people in York as well might have done a short session on drama with Prof. Williams before we went to see Heart of Darkness, which was a wonderful evening. And I drew on Prof. Williams and Sommer's work as well, about how it's participatory and how it gives autonomy, how it's the perfect exercise for active learning, collaborative learning, and deep learning, which is one of the core fundaments of LK20. I'm hoping Prof. Williams in York also mentioned plenty about the fact that drama needs to be developed from primary and should naturally develop out of the use of picture books. So you might want to look at that together, nursery rhymes, songs, etc. So I'm going to huff forward a little bit here as well. Where are we here? Sorry. Yeah, this is the drama section. We looked at some of the bits and ideas around drama. We did it in a TBL. I'm also going to check on the idea that for a lot of you, you might want to explore, again, this is choice, issues of intercultural learning, the sort of fictional diary, the Bildungsroman, and the film, often seen as the ultimate way of developing empathy for other cultures. And we've got this idea about sort of subjective culture there. Very often, approaches to culture involve learning about another culture as if pointing it out and saying you're different. But you can also learn about culture generally. You had a definition of culture as well, which means really the question has to be reflexive. And the question is, who are we? It's one of the debates in British society at the moment, which is, it was this week, it was it was Amritsar, the massacre. And Britain has still not come to terms with the fact that somebody asked this very good question that I learned. Did we not consider how we came to rule 2/5 of the Earth's surface? Did we have to step in to help somebody out? That seems to be the myth there. But so the question about culture for Brits in the Brexit environment is, who are we? That's the thing that Britain seems to be struggling with to a great degree at the moment. You can look at authentic texts and film and literature and stories as being the ultimate exponents of promoting empathy in the classroom, and that seems to be the accepted wisdom in terms of cultural intercultural learning at the moment. You can refer to Munden, you can look at Geertz, you can look at Bennett, that you can draw in if you wanted to. Looking at references, you don't have to go any further than the stuff that we've already done in the course. It's just if you're going to draw in something else from outside from a bit of reading, that's also a good thing to do. It's just good to prepare your examiners for it. Where are we now as well? And then there's a section here at the end as well about cross-cultural learning, cross-curricular learning, which is also very similarly people, places, and events in English-speaking countries. And so you want to look through stories, literature, geography, places, history, events. And we also covered, though I did it in a slightly different way, looks at writing for learning, cooperative writing. We've been looking at collaborative writing and been doing it together. We didn't go into any great depth, but we did look at the different styles of writing. And that's covered in your course material, but it's already 2:10. So what I want to do there is stop that little run through at the moment. What you need to do then is to, obviously, you've chosen books, you want to talk about your books and identify stuff in the books, and then relate it to why that would be useful in the classroom. Thinking about using film or using picture books, different parts of educational methodology as we've got there. So that's the entire task with the problem statement laid out. It means you can look at all of those elements if you want to. So you could look more broadly and in less depth, thinking that that will help you, have something to talk about and be able to structure it. Or you can focus very strongly on one area if you want to. That's really up to you. I'm very strong on this element of choice. I think it will bring out a lot with you. And then what I've done is I've worked hard to make sure that you can bring in full notes with you. So if you do have a difficult time or if anything goes wrong, you've got some kind of support. And so you've got every chance to prepare. Some of you might bring notes and not look at them. You might feel confident enough to go with it and sort of engage as you go along as well. But I want to make sure that everybody gets the best possible shot. And my co-examiner, Hilda, is absolutely lovely, by the way. She's so nice. I met her in York. Okay. So that's it for us YouTubers. We're going to say goodbye now because we're going to go into some oral practice for the last end of the session. Make it so.